To come or to go? That is the question. A rigorous academic comparison of ejaculatory versus defecatory pleasure in miscellaneous male subjects. In debates concerning whether the pleasure of the male orgasm is less than, equal to, or surpasses that of taking a massively explosive crap after having been constipated for several days, there are several things the disputants must necessarily consider. To level the playing field of said debate, we shall assume that the fucker in question has not had his orgasm for a good bit of time, perhaps even a period of weeks. We shall do well to first consider the respective conditions in which the two subjects of our thought experiments find themselves once they have fucked or shat. As Schopenhauer tells us, directly after copulation, the devil's laughter is heard. That is to say, the sexual act inexorably chains the one in its grip to a cruel, mindless will, which is only concerned with the propagation of the species, and which cares not a whit for his personal welfare. As a result, after his orgasm, the fucker will more than likely experience an involuntary, transcendental clarity about the meaninglessness both of his previous desire and of the act itself, along with a sense of grief concerning the suffering the act has been engineered to perpetuate, that is to say, the suffering which would necessarily constitute no less than a part, and more likely the majority of the new sentient being's existence, for which he is responsible. The emptiness he inevitably feels results from his realization that he's been nothing other than a blind, unwitting pawn of this instinctual force, and that he has been once again enslaved by it in order to do its bidding, like a helpless, inert puppet, forced to dance this way and that by a mad puppeteer. He perceives his complicity in an act, the sole purpose of which is to create more of the horrid creatures with whom he is forced to interact daily in the course of his life, beings whose existence and suffering are every bit as appalling as his own. And, in addition, there now lies before or beside him the thing with which he has just busied itself, the woman with and by whom it is expected he is to now speak, and of whom he may be expected, even by himself, to pretend to be fond. Shitting, on the other hand, is quite another matter. After a bout of constipation, it is a reliably ecstatic experience, one of the very few offered us in this sordid life into which we have all been thrown, the aftermath of which is the purest bliss, a feeling of the most intense euphoria. Think long and hard upon the gargantuan craps in which you have delighted when home alone. Your toilet has behaved as if she were the ultimate lover, the most delicious of paramours, one at your constant beck and call and willing to satisfy your every wish, far purer, more welcoming and enticing than any conceivable lover of flesh and blood. She behaves as if she were the most ravishing, generous and benevolent of sexual partners, a sort of quasi-angelic being, a partner who serenades you with the most exquisitely delicious hymns, both to and in bed, where she tenderly rubs your tense shoulders while uttering a host of promises she fully intends to keep. Her seat is neither warm nor is it cold. It is cool, like a pillow is cool in the most luxurious of dreams. Just right, just so, perfect. You take a deep breath as your ass parts in spiritual anticipation. It is as if your buttocks are now two beloved elderly neighbours who, having moved themselves to the side of the road, are now smiling broadly and waving you on encouragingly as you urgently and rapidly pass to your destination. You shiver with delight. A gorgeously sculpted log, perhaps two, perhaps three, make their way into the world. Like Olympic divers, they pierce the welcoming waters, making the most lusciously whispered of splashes, and the sounds of those splashes warm your heart every bit as much as they do your bowels. The sensations leave your entire body tingling. You have suddenly become light, weightless, like an angel, relieved now of all the sufferings of this painful, cruel, and sordid world to which we have been all so brutally condemned. You wipe until you no longer have the need, and see now that the paper has become as white and pure as a forest snow in deepest winter. And although you recognize that pride is a less than admirable emotion, you cannot help yourself. You take several moments to admire and gaze upon your work. You are overcome with immense contentment, enchantment, even elation. After a heartfelt salute, the two of you part ways. The perfect poop. It is a shit-eating grin which now adorns your face, and not one easy to camouflage, although you will take care to not inform others of its origins. You are now quite certain that life will not torture you for many hours to come. You even find yourself tempted to make an anonymous ASMR video recounting the spiritual nature of what you have just experienced. For the generosity of spirit with which you are now overcome as a result of having shat like this, so copiously and satisfyingly, this generosity now produces in you feelings of joy every bit as monumental as were the turds themselves. The Japanese have a word for it, kaibin. The literal translation is pleasantly smooth defecation, a perfectly wonderful word, and one which demonstrates how hopelessly impoverished the English language is. We possess no word or phrase to express the sublime pleasure of sitting upon a porcelain throne, and to then be both enveloped within and overwhelmed by the pure ecstasy of pushing out of ourselves this deeply hoped for, wondrous, and seemingly divine kaibin. One feels as if one is astral travelling, for one does indeed leave the body on those holy occasions during which the turd winds its way so artfully and sensuously out of the body. Who can possibly describe it, this immaculate anal birth? Who has the words, the music? The feelings of accomplishment, satisfaction and love which accompanies the taking of a massive dump are every bit as profound as those of a new mother gazing in rapture upon her newborn infant and weeping copious tears of joy. If you are a simpleton, materialist or scientific reductionist, you might be tempted to write all this off to the stimulation of the prostate. But if you are one of the aforementioned, you will, when doing so, necessarily bump into the hard problem, that dry, hard, lumpy stool which has perplexed the philosophers for millennia. For the stimulation of a prostate in what you would claim is a straightforwardly material world is a thing very different from the transcendent, almost religious ecstasy of poophoria, which is hardly made of matter, including the wondrous matter one has just shat. It is an experience which transcends, and is of a very different nature from anything in the material world. It is common knowledge that many children of potty training age go to great lengths to hold their poop in, because of the very great pleasure which it affords them. And there are more than a few reports of adults who literally come every time they poop, who experience full-blown ejaculations, complete with eyes rolled back in their heads, tremblings and convulsions, which are accompanied by wild, uncontrollable moaning. Whether he be a child or an elderly adult, when the shitter holds back his poop, and when that poop is begging, screaming, beseeching that it be allowed entry into the world, he will, when finally unleashing it, experience a surge of pleasure so massive that his legs will go weak, he will be left breathless, and his soul will be bathed in the sacred waters of a paradise in which he would endlessly tarry, were he able. These deliriously intoxicated shittings have been known to last up to a half hour, a third of which often consist of exactly these sorts of jaw-dropping poogasms. Compare now these scenarios of euphoria and bliss with simple post-coital dysphoria, with the feelings of sadness, anxiety, agitation, and emptiness, which appear immediately after ejaculation and can linger for hours, for far longer than hours, for lifetimes in fact, in persons given to serious existential reflection. These experiences are not the norm, and yet the norm never involves anything less than the infinitely sweet feeling of having a now empty bowel, not to mention the potential delight of then standing up from that throne upon which one had just been so pleasurably sitting, and gleefully cutting the poo into countless little artistic slices with the bold stream of one's urine. Ejaculation provides a quick hit of dopamine, there's no denying it, but it's over rapidly and is inevitably followed by the dysphoria described above. It is an intense peak pleasure, but impossibly and infuriatingly transient. The release of semen leaves one drained, depressed and unmotivated, and for a very straightforward reason. Nature has forced you to do her filthy bidding and no longer requires anything more of you. Hence she offers you nothing further other than misery and regret. On the other hand, after a healthy, massive crap, one is reborn, drunk with delight, elated, transported, and left with a supreme and long-lived sense of well-being. It is a cataract of the self, in which the soul discovers, through its relinquishment, its very deliverance, for who has not felt, in that paradoxical moment of possession by dispossession, that emptied fullness, in which we are briefly absolved of time's curse, of its fiendish hold upon us, the soul's excremancipation, in which it experiences not merely relief, that sad and pale cousin of joy, but rather a cosmic becoming and transcendence of what was, but a moment ago, a self so endlessly and hopelessly constipated with, and suffocated by, anxieties, hoardings, and bloat. We become the gladsome auditors of the plain chant of the enteric brain, that second cerebrum, whose intestinal choreography has now joyfully delivered us from the mundane landfill of our appetites into the inner sanctum of our very self, that most sacred of spaces, holiest of holies, in which the soul floats free of the body, disentangled from all suffering, viscera, and, best of all, liberated finally of shit. For when the body, which has suffered for so long under the tyrannous and cruel yoke of retention, is able to finally and violently surrender its siege stones to gravity, there arises, not a madrigal of narcissism, but rather a Brucknerian coda of feces, a symphonic excremental peroration, a feeling that the ledger has at last been balanced, that the scales of the cosmic order have been satisfied, that the universe is no longer quite so eagerly battering at the gates of one's abdomen, and that the paltry ego, nay, the world not itself, is no longer anywhere near so gnarled and twisted as it was only moments before. If we now cross gingerly from physiology into psychology, that fetid drawing room where impulses, dressed up as motives, sip aperitifs, we must acknowledge that to shit, the act of shitting, despite its petty, everyday crimes of vanity, personal melodrama, and the dull as dishwater operettas of third-rate tunes with which it is so often rife, brings with it a recognition through otherness, in which the desiring self encounters its own absence, after which there now ensues a duet between the self, as it is imagined, and the ego, which has now, as a result of said shitting, been sufficiently inflated to be ready and able to greet it. In brief, the psyche does not merely evacuate its internal pressure, it composes and gives to this pressure an immense, universal, and colossal significance. The retention which had so infantilized the shitter just moments ago is now undone both by and through the excremancipation mentioned above, in which there remains no further breeding grounds for distortion, and no frivolous hoardings which might sour any jealous household gods with which one is burdened. It is as if the soul were now a falcon, loosed from earth's heavy chains, winging its way through the empyrean, untouched by the dust below. Beware that constipation of spirit which continues to stubbornly refuse to let go either of its stools or its stories. That soul shall be left wandering through a museum of fetid heaviness to which it shall be condemned for all eternity. To be redeemed, it must embrace a brave new ethics of exit, a letting go matix, in which it will learn that every taking must be conjoined with a giving, every savour with a severance. The commode will no longer be simply a throne. It will be the classroom in which humility conducts its most persuasive seminar, the chief concern of which will be the metaphysic of enoughness, that is to say, that the world, once taken in, must also be let out, that the economy of being is no simple accumulation, but rather one of circulation, and that the truest deliverance consists not in departure from oneself, but rather in a humble return to the ordinariness of the commonplace, that prosaic province in which the self finds itself able to encourage its angelic nature to embrace and kiss the animal lying within, to, as it were, shake hands with the janitor of its bowels, nay, to become that very janitor, to revel, embrace, and merge with its custodial nature. On the other hand, with each ejaculation, there is now the threat of progeny, for with every squirt there comes the threat of a potential mortgage. Whereas each and every bowel movement, noble and brown, necessarily and by its nature, produces nothing other than the supreme moral victory of emptiness, the blissful transcendence of that nice, clean on the inside sensation. A sacred, holy redemption. Tell me all this isn't poetry. Walt Whitman would feel compelled to, at the very least, tweet it. This argument's opponents might now be tempted to claim that masturbation or romance allow for imagination, for a narrative denied the shitter. That with fucking, there is the possibility of delicious yearning for fantasy, high-end dramaturgy, and that pooping has no foreplay. But that's all the purest rubbish. Prior to an explosive defecation, there has always been the most meticulous, extraordinary foreplay, ceaseless preparation and anticipation, the slow build and promise of feverish intestinal voyages taken on barges, the chambers of which have been loaded full to bursting with lentils, fear and hope, along with countless intoxicating Arabian night tales of fibre and fate. The urge rises not like simple, vulgar lust, but rather as if making divine prophecies, inevitable and pure. And so the toilet seat awaits, cool as the lover's indifferent thigh. The orchestra tunes, gravity takes its solo, and then splish, splosh, splat. Nirvana. Can any gooey, sticky, guilt-ridden post-coital tissue possibly claim the purity of that ivory, pure, alabaster bit of toilet paper once it has become that divine milk-white and unblemished pearl so beloved of shitters? Once it has, shall we say, completed its ascent into heaven, the fucker chases pleasures that end in disgust. He comes, then curses both himself and his existence. The shitter finishes lighter, cleaner, and ready to face the day. The fucker busily Googles penance, while the shitter walks merrily through, nay, floats merrily over the park, the town, the nation, the globe itself. Romance? Those who crow of romance? Their insipid moans are prayers heard only by Mephistopheles. The toilet is the last and most precious confessional booth of our sin-drenched, secular world in which there is no need of priest and no small, watery, hypocritical talk to be made. Just silence, porcelain, and the aleatoric hum of the vent fan. Bliss. Consider what follows. It is taken from the journals of a desperately unrelieved man. I haven't taken a shit in 19 days, nor have I ejaculated. I am, at this point, less a man than a hopelessly pressurized vessel of thwarted natures, a double-locked chamber of unspeakable yearning, my semen boiling upwards, my feces downwards, each seeking its escape, neither permitted its discharge. There is a fullness in me, obscene and philosophical. I am now a veritable platonic realm of aching blue balls and abdominal agonies. My guts hum like wasp nests. My testicles complain like twin philosophers suspended upon a meat hook in the ninth circle of the inferno. The devil whispers in my sigmoid colon of the tortures to come. Last night I dreamt of the perfect poop. I saw it descending in slow motion, as if held aloft by the blessed pilgrims of Tannhauser. It was elegant, sculpted, a turd worthy of Michelangelo. The dream was so vivid that I awoke crying with relief, certain that I had been delivered. But no, it was only air, a false lying dawn, the betrayal of a deceitful mendacious sphincter. My stomach, meanwhile, had begun whispering in tongues, each undigested meal a symphony of remorse. I felt only the faint rumblings and sighs of the ghosts who inhabit my bowels. And then there is my lust, which builds like methane in a sealed mine. Each woman I pass seems to exude not only perfume, but fibre as well, insoluble, mocking fibre. They walk, these lust-drenched beasts, without a care in the world, while ceaselessly, inadvertently, and involuntarily displaying the derision of their perfect digestion, their eyes laxatives, their laughter peristalsis. I cannot look without yearning for both reliefs at once, to come, to go, and, if neither is to be had, to be once and for all, irrevocably gone. I have tried everything. Walks, prunes, philosophy. My viscera have become a theological paradox. The sperm and the stool have entered into a silent pact of rebellion, as if they were two prisoners refusing parole. Sometimes I imagine that if one escapes, makes it out, the other will too, and that I will simultaneously ejaculate and defecate, an event of such cosmic symmetry, it would likely end the universe. Is this why I dare not push? Do I, perhaps, fear transcendence? My mind circles endlessly. Which pleasure is greater? Which truer? The ejaculation? Violent, specific, with its brief annihilation of self? Or the defecation? Serene, expansive, with its so deeply coveted rebirth into cleanliness? The one creates, the other absolves. Creation, absolution, the two crimes of simply being alive. I suspect now that God, if he exists, is a constipated, ferociously horny being, and that even he is eternally denied his relief in both the domains in which he has decreed that his creatures suffer so, in order to maintain the tensions implicit in creation. Each star, each thought, each sin, a trapped bubble of divine gas. I can no longer distinguish between the erotic and the excretory. I cannot dream of fucking a woman without a symphonic soundtrack of voluminous plopping sounds followed by the most shattering flourishes of orgasmic splashes and flushes. My libido and colon are locked and loaded within a perpetual single prayer. Perhaps this is all that remains of philosophy, the search for the proper outlet. Plato spoke of realms to which we might ascend. I, simpler and more earthly, speak and dream only of evacuation. I am a sort of Job, nay, a Sisyphus, sloshing my way through a seemingly infinite sigmoid colon towards the holy grail of my rectum, a destination at which, it seems, I shall never arrive. Yet hark, I feel something stirring now, a tremor. My body vibrates like a machine warming to its purpose. Could it be? Is there to be deliverance? If I should perish mid-effort, tell the scholars and the doctors, that although I did indeed love them all, the ejaculators and the defecators both, it is ultimately and quite decisively with the defecators that my heart lies. Nothing could be clearer to me, nothing more true. And thus the tides of my fate now beckon. My providence calls and is seemingly at hand. Thus my calling rises up before me. I am to be the Walt Whitman of shit, smelling not of my armpits, no, we'll have none of that, but rather of my poops. I shall write endless verse, stanza upon stanza, bathed in the giddiness and beatitudes of my divine excretions, in their stench, and in my boundless love for them. Having expelled and, thank heavens, continuing to now expel multitudes, I shall spend the remainder of my life creating the most monumental exaltations, panegyrics, and eulogies for the consecrated hailstorms of these golden brown blessings. And yet I know full well that every morning I shall once again perform my necessary rituals, those of coffee, fibre, and despair. It shall never be otherwise. But that there shall then come, as a result, again and again perfect mornings, which shall be countless in their number, in which the air will hum, thick with possibility, full of gentle, gliding descents, and with the near-silent Olympic dives into porcelain pools of those brown colonic gods whom I so worship, and from whom is never heard a hint of splash, followed eventually by that single, ecstatic, pristine wipe of a toilet paper as stark white as a readily surrendered flag. I shall then, once again, salute my work, bid it a tearful goodbye, and flush it to the destiny for which it so longs, there to plumb the depths of what will surely and always be its, and my, ongoing personal nirvana. How pitiful, though, that a man's entire metaphysics can be traced along a few feet of tubing. The philosophers speak of being a nothingness. As for me, I live it. Even the most cherished of my dreams are, these days, almost entirely somatic, of incomprehensibly sparkling clean public restrooms, whose stalls stretch to an infinity populated by angelic hosts, all crying hosannas for the redemptive peristalsis of my soul. And so it is that I, at the very same time that I celebrate these Empyrean mysteries, envy the beasts, the dog squats, the bird voids mid-flight. It is only man that so endlessly sits on porcelain and is forced to philosophize thus. If I should perish on some future night, ruptured and unspent, let this be my testament, that the chief and foremost pleasure in my life has been only and ever the final unfettered overcoming of my hesitation, those great leaps downwards for which I have spent my days in the most constant and resolute of prayers, and that the body, given the chance, can and will turn all of philosophy into nothing more or less than straightforwardly understood plumbing, both inner and outer, and that, short of the final triumph of the grave, that the only reliable and constant victory consists in nothing other than that sacred silence which ensues after the sound of the last flush has finally retreated into eternity, when all that has passed through my ass darkly melts into the imperishable weave and fabric of time, is dissolved into the unchanging ether, and becomes irretrievably loosed from the bonds of all that was once mortal. Abstract. The manuscript above, discovered near the lavatory in room 7B, is analysed herein as the first recorded instance of simultaneous ejaculatory defecatory retention syndrome, SEDRS. The patient's writings suggest a strong initial conflict between sympathetic and parasympathetic imperatives, which produced in him, in its first early stages, a psychosomatic stalemate at the interface of libido and bowel, a deadlock eventually resolved, with extraordinary relief and pleasure on his part, by and through his massively crapping. Psychodynamic interpretation. Following Freud's observation that the child who withholds feces achieves protosexual gratification, the subject's abstinence can be read as a regression to what we shall henceforth refer to as his anal idealism, that is to say, a fixation on what Jung would later call the archetype of the perfect log, a symbol of both death and deliverance which Jung located in the collective unconscious, which he made up out of whole cloth, and then declared present in all cultures and at all times. The subject's simultaneous dread of and longing for release reflect a Kierkegaardian anxiety in the face of what the subject perceived as infinite possibility. Concluding remarks. Comparative studies reveal widespread tension between creation and elimination. In the case of this subject, the stated dread of potentially creating more horrid creatures with whom he would then be forced to interact, whose existence and suffering, he concludes, would likely be every bit as appalling as his own, and the various forms of dysphoria he experiences when confronted with the expectation that he speak with the thing lying before or beside him, or even to pretend to be fond of it, has historically, repeatedly, and significantly dampened the pleasure quotient of his orgasms. However, and this is crucial, at the same time, the solitary nature of defecation seems to reliably restore his feelings of existential authenticity. The authors of this study see no downsides to said preference, even to his living only for it, and for it alone, nor to his obeisance towards, and constant worshipping at, its porcelain altar. The defecatory act has become, for him, the equivalent of a symbolic, civic, even religious ritual of individuation, a joyous, festive flush propelling him towards self-actualization and freedom, as both the overcoming of his individual suffering and the unravelling of what he perceives of as the mysterious world knot which lies at the heart of being, that cosmic labyrinth and tangled skein of being, which so inevitably unnerves him in his times of sustained constipation.